Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for signing on for today's webinar, Maximizing Data and Engagement for Management Outcomes with CSA.org. I'm Jennifer Shirk. I'm the Interim Director of the Citizen Science Association, and I'm really pleased to have Greg Newman joining us today from Colorado State University, leader of the CSA.org program and platform, and he's going to tell us more about this topic in just a few moments. As folks are signing on and joining us, I did want to quickly orient you to the Zoom platform and let you know that since we have over 70 people registered today, we have folks in listen only, but are working to facilitate an active conversation in the chat window. So find the chat window, introduce yourselves, tell us where you are and something you're hoping to learn from this webinar, and feel free to add questions and comments in there as we go along. I'm going to be moderating the chat window and facilitating Q&A with Greg as the webinar proceeds. So before we dive right into the main topic, I did just want to give some context for the webinar series for the Citizen Science Association. We are early on starting and still piloting a webinar series as an effort to fulfill some of the goals that we have as an organization to provide access to tools and resources and to support communication and professional development across the field. And I think this webinar today will hit both of those topics as we learn more from Greg about the tools and resources that he has to offer to support all of our work and growth in facilitating citizen science. We do have other webinars coming up that I'm excited to announce and share. Although the details are still to be firmed up, we have free webinars that are coming through two different channels. One is via the Citizen Science Association working groups, and already in the pipeline is a whole series on ethics from our ethics working group, the first of which is slated for mid-September. And in the concept stage is already some webinars forthcoming on data and metadata from that working group as well. And then also in the pipeline already, and there will be more, are free webinars from our member organizations. One already working in the concept stage from BSCS and the FieldScope platform, and another from Dixon Butler of the Youth Learning and Citizen Environmental Scientists Organization. I also wanted to put a quick plug in for the upcoming conference that will be in Raleigh, North Carolina, CSA 2019 in mid-March. If you're listening to this live, the call for proposals is still open through the 21st of September. So if you're interested in giving a talk there, please take advantage of that. The URL is below, and regardless, it's a great place to really build your connections and skills across a really diverse field of folks doing citizen science in many different contexts. So looking forward to seeing a really great group of folks there in our next event. Hope you can join us. So again, quickly, an orientation to the Zoom platform that we're using today for this webinar. There's a chat window where we're going to be facilitating all of the conversations, and please do take advantage of that. I'll be moderating the chat for Greg as he takes over here in just a moment to get to the heart of the content on maximizing natural resource management outcomes through data and volunteer management on the CSA.org platform. So Greg, with that, please feel free to take it away. And Greg, thanks so much for joining us. I will just add as well, I'm really pleased. I've known Greg for a very long time. As the field of citizen science has grown, I consider him a good friend as well as a close colleague. He's a board member as well, coincidentally, for the Citizen Science Association. And I really appreciate his commitment to excellence, both in data management, which I think is going to be a big part of what he's talking about today, but also his real commitment to deep and meaningful engagement of communities throughout every step of the citizen science process. So Greg, that's just by means of a very brief introduction. Really glad to have you here, and thanks for offering this webinar for us.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Okay, I'm sharing my screen. Getting a little feedback, but I think it's okay. Can everybody hear me okay? Ah, that's better. And you can still hear me, I think?
You sound good to me.
Perfect. Great. Great. Well, thanks for everyone for attending. It's a huge honor to be able to share some of the learning. Frankly, we're all on this adventure together, and our team, a very small team here at Colorado State University, is just grateful to be in the conversation, learning from you all, learning from practitioners who are trying to do amazing, great citizen science work through the different projects they're working on. And so we've been fortunate and honored and grateful to be able to witness some of those programs through their use of some tools that our team has been developing over the last 10 years now. It seems like time does fly. And so, here we are trying to just share with you some of the learnings we've had through working with projects that we know and work with who are using CSA.org. And also just kind of an opportunity to give you a little deep dive into the under the hood of the workings of CSA.org and where we're headed in the future and those sorts of things. So thank you to the Citizen Science Association, of which I wanted to make a plug for. Obviously been involved a lot with the CSA, and just grateful to be a part of that team. A lot of resources available through citizenscience.org, a lot of resources available through the Citizen Science Association broadly, whether those resources and opportunities be conferences every 2 years, as Jennifer mentioned, upcoming conference March, Raleigh 2019, or whether those resources be local meetups that are starting to take shape and the Citizen Science Association is talking about, or whether they be the journal that the association is I'm so grateful that they're taking this on is publishing in an open platform called Citizen Science Theory and Practice. And so other resources to take note: if you're in the federal agencies, there's a growing community of practice on crowdsourcing and citizen science, which amounts to and has built forth a platform called citizenscience.gov with some resources for folks in those agencies. And they've created a little catalog of projects. There's a toolkit brought forth through the Cornell Lab of Ornithology and scistarter.com, and the list goes on. This is by no means comprehensive, but just a couple of resources to check out. So I kind of want to share a brief story of kind of how I came into this foray. Back in the day, 2007, I guess even prior to that, maybe 2005, I, as a plant ecologist, was really trying to engage the public in meaningful ways, for the reason that as an ecologist, we were doing species distribution models, and we ran into a wall. We were trying to model and predict, like a heat map of where invasive plants may become worse in the future under changing climates. And the upshot is we couldn't do that very effectively. And the reason was that we were collecting data on public land that we could access, and we were missing data, meaningful and important presence-absence data of these species on private land. Large expanses of large ranch land, for example, privately owned in the West. And so those models were performing poorly. And so we started engaging the public in helping us make management decisions and conservation prioritization decisions to determine where ought our mitigation and control efforts be best spent based on the predicted distributions and spread of these invasive plants throughout the landscape. And so that was kind of serendipity struck for us. Our research team was working with collaborators at the USGS here in Fort Collins, and through that work, we started really working deeply with ranchers and landowners, and we kind of stumbled upon, at the time, some platforms. I think some folks here, Noah Newman is on the line, I believe, from Kokoraz, and FieldScope. I think Sean is here as well. And at the time, there was a few, but not many platforms. Obviously, everyone knows eBird, and so there was a couple platforms looking at either plant phenology or birds or weather, and there wasn't a way for noxious weed programs, say beat back buffalo grass in Arizona, for example, to really easily spin up an endeavor, kind of in a do-it-yourself kind of way, to build and create, design and enact and implement a really effective citizen science campaign to help better inform the managers about the whereabouts of buffalo grass, which happens to be an invasive species in Arizona. And so our mission became clear to us at that time. We said, well, there's a gap and we need to fill that gap. So we became very, very motivated to try to do our best to fill that gap. So what was born was a mission to build some platform, a system where people like the Beatback Buffalo Grass crew could design, do it in a do-it-yourself kind of way, their own citizen science campaign. And so we really wanted to achieve a couple things. One is to provide comprehensive support for citizen science programs, regardless of the topic they're interested in studying. So our goals were to support the full spectrum of citizen science needs. We realized that it's not just about data management. Citizen science, at the heart of it, is people. And so you need to recruit people, you need to manage people, you need to maybe coordinate their efforts. And so we wanted to not be forgetful of that very key piece of the citizen science puzzle. Second, we wanted to elevate the scientific rigor and impact of these programs and really have an eye towards making sure that this is meaningful science that's being done. And then improve data standardization and awareness of, well, who's doing what where. And so by having a platform, well, multiple people are doing a variety of different things, diverse heterogeneous topics of study on the same platform, we were hoping that people could learn from each other. So we wanted to improve standardization, interoperability, integration, access, and sharing, so kind of in an open science platform way. So basically provide a comprehensive platform where anyone, anywhere, can create, design, and enact their own projects and have confidence that those projects really have meaningful impacts. But when you look at designing and creating projects, you might think of a few basic steps. You're like, well, this shouldn't be too bad. We should be able to just kind of recruit and manage some members, maybe build up a little data sheet, whether it be Microsoft Word or whatever, so you can put it on your clipboard and off you go and you fill out these data sheets and maybe benefit from increasing our spatial and temporal ability of capturing field ecological data. So then that really leads into collecting data, and then of course do some analysis across the larger data set compiled by volunteers, interpret what the those mean for you as a manager, share the results and move forward and iterate. Assess and of course do some program evaluation throughout this entire process, from formative to summative ways. But then when we looked at that in deeper, we said, no, this is not as simple as it looks. And so at the end of the day, you got to be thinking about identifying protocols and methods and partnering with other stakeholders, and partnerships are the heart of these kind of bottom-up endeavors at a community place-based level. To try to identify scientists you might partner with, create experimental designs, think about where your samples might be, and then be able to ensure that your data that you might gather are structured data, in the sense that they might be transect based or nested plot based, or point intercept based, or what all the different methods ecologists employ to do scientific investigations of the natural world. Develop trainings, right? You got to think about recruiting folks, but then ensuring that they're well trained to do and follow the protocols you've identified. And I joke, but every time I talk, people think I'm a burrito fanatic, but you got to buy burritos for these folks. And so, you got to have food, you have to have resources, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you got to have restrooms nearby, and think about the people side of the equation throughout the endeavor. You have to do some trainings for these folks, order supplies, the list goes on. It's super complicated. Quality assurance, quality control. Are you going to have multiple volunteer teams doing repeat measurements of the same location for QA purposes, for like data validation reasons, running statistics, creating graphs, making sure you have access to software to do these complex work. So clearly this is a monumental task, and our goal became to ease the hassle and the pains associated with doing all this work. And if there was anything we could do to help practitioners streamline these very complex, hard processes, that would be our goal. So theoretically, we thought, well, the challenge for us at CSA.org is that there's a variety of ways to do this. And so great papers. In fact, Jennifer Shirk, who introduced this webinar, put out a really great paper on ecology and society that detailed a lot of different ways citizen science might be approached and how those approaches might impact the outcomes of those programs. So, we've seen kind of the 3 C's: contributory, collaborative, and co-created citizen science endeavors. And that's really getting at the design model used for your work, who's participating and how you're going to govern that project. Is it truly open where anyone can jump in and participate, or is it something where you do have deep, really intense trainings where you do want to actually vet who participates because you want to ensure that they have gone through your training, for example. So there's kind of these hierarchical governance structures all the way down to like open crowdsourced approaches. And then of course what's measured is a variety of different things, from photos and videos to decimals to floating point variables, decimal data, to categorical data, to textual social science kind of approaches to gathering qualitative information. So from quantitative to qualitative to pictures to videos, we wanted to support it. And then, of course, how is it being measured? So like I mentioned before, are there different plot types that are being employed, and is there an importance semantically to understand the difference between a subplot 1 and a subplot 2 on the same transect, and then a repeat iteration of that transect somewhere else for a second transect? And so all of this becomes really important when you're trying to do meaningful, engaged scholarship, engaging volunteers in authentic scientific research. And then from a governance perspective, we realized really quick that in case of our work initially, we saw a variety of kind of governance approaches. And these governance relates to who participates and who has access to data. So we're actually currently working on a paper, hopefully to see the light of day, hopefully somewhere, for practitioners, maybe citizen science theory and practice, on kind of the ethics behind these different governance structures. So anyway, just food for thought. We're kind of working on that to articulate this better in the literature. But this has been going on on CSA.org for quite some time, where projects have choices related to membership. And so we kind of created some icons to say whether it's a member-based project or an open project. So those orange icons here. The member-based projects might be where there's some member approval, right? Manager approval. Well, there's a training, and the manager would like to ensure that those who are participating have been trained and therefore must approve or the access to the project. Yeah, versus open projects like our Stream Tracker project that's growing leaps and bounds these days, where folks are, basically anyone can just join a click of a button and get started. And then from a data governance perspective, on the other hand of this figure in green, there's really public and private access to data. So some projects feel it needed to be on an open data access kind of scenario, where any manager, any land manager ought to be able to access, download, query, and visualize and map data in any way she feels fit. And others are like, no, this is very sensitive information. Maybe they're working with threatened and endangered species. And so they might say, hey, we'd like to just make this available to either just our members or just the scientists involved, for reasons that vary dramatically across various settings. So basically, we kind of, as ecologists, have seen that kind of data flow through this, theorized data lifecycle, from a data management perspective: planning projects, starting projects, collecting data, analyzing, sharing, and then maybe the end of life, right? At some point, projects come to an end of life. There was a project enacted through CSA.org through the City of Fort Collins Amphibian Monitoring Program that went about studying the effect of invasive bullfrogs on the plain spadefoot, for example. they got started, and 3 years later, their grant money was complete, and they actually answered their research question. And they were able to provide valuable management information to the state herpetologist, who then started enacting different implementations to manage invasive bullfrogs along the Colorado Front Range, with an eye towards conserving habitat and populations of more native plain spadefoot the plain spadefoot species. So the upshot is that not all projects live forever, and so you need to be thinking about what that end goal looks like, kind of in mind. So you can think about this as the scientific method, observing, asking research questions, gathering evidence, and drawing conclusions. You can think about it as like a project management perspective, or you can think about it in blue as like what data lifecycle might look like, from planning, collecting, assuring that data quality, analyzing data, describing it with metadata, which is very something near and dear to my heart, because then we can amplify the impact of the data collected by well-documented data sets that might be reusable once appraised for fitness for use by others who might want to leverage and benefit from the great data your project was able to gather. So anyway, just a little visual of how we see data flowing through programs and projects. So that led us to building this platform, and this is CSA.org, and I'll kind of walk folks through its use and applications, and then I'm going to talk about some examples of how we can kind of leverage this platform to help do some management with an engaged scholarship together with our stakeholders. So basically, CSA.org, it's a global platform. At the time of writing the abstract for this webinar, there was about 550 projects. We're up to about 100 more, 650. So we're busy, and our goal is to support the diversity and heterogeneity of these projects. Some might be looking at hip dysplasia in dogs. Some might be looking at the productivity of maple syrup trees being tapped in the northwoods of Wisconsin. Boy Scout troops are investigating similar things. Others might be looking at water quality with respect to fracking effects and fracking endeavors, say in the Marcellus Shale region in Pennsylvania. Others might be looking at wildlife species like the Front Range Piker project. So our challenge, but our excitement is how can we best support diverse, heterogeneous, topic-based projects that are usually place-based, but vary in scale, from Stream Tracker now looking at 42 different states to maybe a really hyper-local project enacted by like River Edge Nature Center in Wisconsin. So, you might see spatial scale variety, you might see topical variety, you might see governance structure variety. So our brains start exploding when we're trying to figure out ways to support these various needs. And the upshot, though, is we end up compiling a rather simple list or directory of these projects, much akin to other directories out there, but these are projects that are actually using CSA.org to design and implement, I should say both, their work. And so you'll see a directory of all the projects leveraging our tools real quick by just simply clicking on projects. And then, of course, you can create your own. And when you do create a project, you end up with like a kind of a template that we provide that kind of scaffolds your work, much like you might see a template at the beginning of creating a Facebook file. So you do. Those are limiting and flexible. They're both limiting and flexible. No system and no platform can do everything you'd like it to do, of course, in ways specific to your unique needs. But what we're really trying to do is come up with some really powerful generalities that provide some great template starting places where you can then kind of customize and make it your own. Whether that be literally changing the user experience, which you can do on this platform to hide a forum or add a forum if that's important to you, to changing the order of these different tabs, from view data to submit data to resources to media to feedback for evaluative reasons, to research questions that you might be asking. You can customize this interface, hide, share, and otherwise change the order of these tabs so that your presentation to your volunteers change, and this can change through time. So if it's the beginning of a field season, you might want to do a formative assessment, so you might put feedback right up front. And the first time your volunteers log into your project profile, they see this nice feedback form that says, hey, fill out my kind of like SurveyMonkey or Qualtrics. We've got an embedded system like that that in CSA.org, where you can kind of set up a little survey, complete with like Likert scale questions and other such things, and say, hey, let's do some formative assessment of what our volunteers are hoping to gain out of this work. And then you could maybe during the field season have submit data at the first position, because they're actively entering data. And then of course, end of field season, maybe do a summative assessment, bring back to life that feedback tab. So in any event, from a governance perspective, you might see situations where if you happen to be a member-based project, you click your Manage Members button here and you see pending users requesting to join this FRPP project. You can approve and deny those requests, maybe drop them an email to ask more about, hey, did you actually go to our training? I mean, we saw you on your list, but you know, those kind of things. And then of course, they just bump down into the members once approved. So at the heart of CSA.org is really the defining what you need to measure, and this is an infinite definition possibilities kind of situation. But what it's nice is we're also trying to encourage, as I mentioned in the goals and mission, is to say, hey, we'd like to standardize some things. So if there's water quality efforts happening in Maine, and there's some happening in Seattle, and there's some happening in New Mexico, there might be some common protocols that they might want to share. And so I'll talk about this a little later in some real world kind of management context. But the upshot is that we are very transparent about who's measuring what. And so we'll kind of put a little tally up there. It says 50 projects at this time. We're measuring the measurement of presence of something. So height or percent cover, or DBH for the foresters in the crowd, diameter at breast height, life stage, etc. And so you can create your own and add to this list, or you could adopt what's already being measured by somebody else and say, hey, I'm going to bring that into my data sheet and leverage it because it's in across multiple citizen science projects. And we separate those. I'll go back into things measured about species and things measured about anything else. And that's basically the way the world works for us. And that's just a helpful dichotomous categorization of what's being measured. Of course, units, same thing. You could have microsiemens per centimeter, and no one else is measuring that yet, in that you're using that unit, so you could just add it. But as soon as you add it, you can adopt and borrow from others for units of measurement as well. So here's where the action kind of happens in our datasheet creator. There's a preview and a save, and I'm going to show you a kind of a CSA 2.0 vision at the end here as to what this might look like in the future. We have great hopes for even improved datasheet creator, but basically you can add species to your datasheet. We like to think of this as Legos. You're building Legos. You're just adding your next Lego to your datasheet, and you can witness it being built in front of you as you use this tool. And so once you add things, you can specify the units of them. You can change the labels, you can change the order of them, and a lot of great flexibility so that you can really basically do it yourself and measure you have your volunteers measure anything you would like them to measure for you. So this is kind of what you get. This is an example of a stream monitoring data sheet. There's two real key decisions. I'm going to go back here. There's this whole notion of where. I'm teaching a graduate GIS class, and I come kind of to the world from a GIS perspective. At the heart of an observation is where, who, what, when, and where, right? Who made the observation? What was measured when you made that observation? Where was it measured? Key factor. And then when, right? And so we kind of put some boilerplate information into all data sheets to make sure we have those spatial components covered, but we give great flexibility in how folks specify the where. So they can say, hey, our volunteers, we want to tell them to pick from a certain set of predefined locations that we've identified, whether they be in a stratified random context or a random context or opportunistic way. Say, these are the places I want my volunteers to make measurements. And so then that makes their life easy because they just have a pick list, as you see in this slide, little location drop down, you pick it and it zooms in. Map gives you a confirmation. You say, yep, sure enough, that's where I am. I'm at that stream gauging station and I'm in the correct location, so I'm going to go measure the water pH. Alternatively, if you had picked, instead of entered by user, or sorry, predefined, you could say entered by user. So like a fox project studying fox, swift fox here in Fort Collins, you don't know where the fox might be, right? And so instead, the user needs to tell you where they were, wherever that might be, when they saw the fox. So those are what data sheets look like. This is kind of a confirmation of an opportunistic location. You can search by location, you can zoom in on the map, you can use the map, or you can specify your own latitude, longitude coordinates, or if this is on one of our mobile apps, the phone will know where it is already, and that will automatically happen for you. So additionally, some projects started coming to CSA and saying, hey, we've been doing this for 20 years. We want to be able to bring in our data in one fell swoop. So we built in a little tool that with some guidance from some help documentation helps you set up your columns and bring in your data automatically with the who, what, when, where already known. So then you can magically start off with, you know, thousands of observations and bring that in and get started and append data to that data set that you brought in from a legacy upload. So at the end of the day, whether it's a legacy upload or just a recent observation made by a volunteer named Thomas in this case, you might see what we call it like a thanks for your observation, like a validation page. And so this is what they get after they submit their data. And it says, hey, this is what we saw you submit. And it just reflects back to the volunteer, this is what was submitted. As volunteers, they have observations to correct typos. If they look this over and say, nope, that wasn't quite right, they see little edit pencils next to each of these things, like stream flow low. If they said, no, this was a mistake, I clicked the wrong thing when I entered my data sheet, they themselves would see an edit pencil there and they could make a change. As well as project managers and authorities on projects, we have different roles for different people. So those folks with those higher up roles can also make edits to data should they be necessary. We see photos that were submitted by volunteers. A lot of people doing repeat photo monitoring. We have some glacial monitoring in Alaska, looking at repeat photography and glacier retreat. Super exciting kind of work being done with photos as well. So at the end of the day, we accumulate all of these observations made by volunteers, and then we do some very customizable visualizations of these data over time to be able to see trends in time and make comparisons and the like. And so I'll talk about that here in a second. The system automatically spits out descriptive statistics, mean, min, max, standard deviation, etc. As we go through. And I'm just taking a note at chat here. So sorry, I got a little distracted. But so in any event, we're looking through, and we can see trends in data through time. If a new observation were made, this chart would instantly update in real time for folks, for managers and volunteers alike. So here we are with projects all over the place. We are working towards, in CSA 2.0, broader language support. Right now, everything's in English, although the things you measure are often being mentored in a variety of languages, from Spanish to Amharic to what have you. And so certainly the system allows you, when you're building up your project descriptions, your purpose, your goals, objectives, and your data sheet measurements, to use a language of your choice. It's just that the actual platform is currently in English. We do hope to expand that moving forward at our CSA 2.0 launch, hopefully early next year. So,
Greg, this is Jennifer just chiming in quickly. I heard you mention that you were keeping an eye on the chat. There was an active question coming in that gets at an appreciation that the platform that you have here is really powerful and can accommodate multiple things, like multiple languages. This particular question is whether volunteers can submit multiple photos with any one data point. Do you want to just quickly give an answer to that?
Yeah, thanks for that. And do chime in with questions throughout as I walk through things. Yes, absolutely. Right now, we allow 4 per innovation, thinking oftentimes we had heard requests for cardinal direction photos. However, in the next release, that would be an unlimited situation. So there's a little plus button that says just keep adding a photo. And that can be done both on the mobile apps and on the data sheets. And so the data sheet currently de facto boilerplate presents 4 options for 4 photos.
Great, thanks Greg, and thanks Haley for asking that question. A reminder to others that you can feel free to add those into the chat at any point.
Yeah, great question. Keep them coming. So fortunately, we wanted to do a little bit more geospatial work than just looking at where projects' headquarters might be located. So we also started developing some kind of web GIS work. We're really rethinking this moving forward for our next launch. And I'll talk a little bit more about that and what our vision might be down the road. But currently, you can slice and dice these data by project. We hope to add slice and dicing data by species, by attribute, by measurement, by location, by person, as well as by project. So in this case, we're looking at a sea of citsci.org data in yellow and just a subset of data that has been measured by the Front Range Piker project along the Colorado Front Range here in my neck of the woods. So additionally, we let you specify what you want to compare for some comparison. So in this case, a volunteer has logged in and selected 2 measurements, air temperature and water temperature, blue and black, and they've selected 4 of 245 monitoring locations that volunteers in this project happen to be measuring and monitoring. They might be measuring 20 different measurements, and you could look at all 20 as well, but they've just particularly chosen to pick 2. And so now you can see the system generating standard errors for the 4 locations for the 2 measurements at each location to determine whether there may or may not be significant differences between these variables at these locations. This is not yet doing the full-on statistical tests. In this case, it would be an analysis of variance or an ANOVA. If you were looking at 2 and things were parametric and your descriptive statistics that the platform is providing is showing normality, you could then do t-tests. Otherwise, you'd be in the Wilcoxon rank sum world. But one of the things we're really excited about is deploying customizable R scripts that would allow folks to specify statistics that they want done in a real-time automated way with these sorts of comparisons. We don't do that yet, but you can download the data and dump it into your stats package to actually do the analyses. But at least this is giving you a reasonable and statistically, meaningful comparison of these sites across these 2 measurements. And then relationships, everyone wants to say, is there a relationship between water temperature and total dissolved solids, for example, in ppm? And so you might look at whether there's any linear relationships, at least from a cursory visual perspective. So the visualizations are quite flexible from trends to comparisons to relationships. Yeah.
I'm just, before you move on from data, I did want to chime in. There are a couple of questions here, and I'm going to try and feed them in as flow with the conversation. There are 2 questions related to downloading data and data formats. What formats are these data downloads available in, and can you do them in multiple options?
Yeah, you betcha. So there's a variety of options currently. The download allows you to specify which field, so which measurements you would like in your custom download. So let's say you're measuring 20 variables, but you're quite particularly interested in pH, TDS, and connectivity for the water folks of the world. So you can actually limit your download to all data from your project that has recorded those 3 variables. Alternatively, you can choose all 20, of course, and there's a drag and drop interface where you select the measurements you are interested in. The data formats for data out currently, ironically and unfortunately, we initially started with supporting ESRI shape files as well as CSV files. Our data volume grew, and so performance decreased when you're trying to generate these proprietary formats. We do envision bringing that back in the near future, but currently you can download these data as CSV and then import them into any GIS package. And then, because you'll have latitude, longitude coordinates associated with each record in your download. So CSV, these charts are downloadable. There's little hamburger bars next to the title of that chart. You can actually download the charts as PNGs, PNGs, or JPEGs. Should you be making a report for a stakeholder, for example. So lots of options, hopefully growing options in the future. Great questions.
Great. There's a related question here from Christy, as well as thanks from folks about your easy to understand response there. Okay, you can download them as a PNG. Is it possible at all to embed them as a live table into a website? Or maybe is that something down the line?
Yeah, great question. Really, really great question. And the short answer is no. The long answer is down the road. But how would that happen? And so we're actually making a huge lift of CSA we've been working on this for the last 6 months, and we see another 6 months yet to go. And that facelift will really make this an API-based system. I mean, there already are APIs, and I'll talk about those. Those are called application programming interfaces. And so we'd like to do two things. Following the lead of SciStarter, we use their APIs and they use ours. And so it's a nice win. We'd like to put in an embeddable widget so you could copy an embeddable snippet of code and put that code for a particular chart or for a particular data sheet or for a particular project and embed it, say, in a WordPress site. Say there's a nature center that has their own WordPress website, in which case you could basically copy this embedded HTML code, which contains some JavaScript, and you would see that dynamically updating trend chart in your WordPress website, which would be within your own nature center's website. So that's the long-term goal that does not yet exist, unfortunately, today.
Great, Greg, thanks. Just before we move on from that, there's a couple of questions coming in here that I'm going to sort of save to the end in case you cover them coming up. But one last overarching question: any issues with either submitting data from or downloading data to places outside of the US?
I have not had any trouble with that. Have a lot of projects in Africa, UK, a lot of them in Mexico, have Costa Rica, have not had any issues. So we are global in that way. The caveat is that some of our projects have asked for support for UTM data, and World Geodetic Data System, WGS84 datum, decimal degrees, latitude, longitude data for the GIS tech folks out there. And upshot is we're currently really just using latitude, longitude because of its global reach, and it's pretty well known in different parts of the world. So no trouble having folks enter data in any part of the world so far.
Great, thanks. I am taking note of these other questions that I think Greg might touch on some of them as he proceeds, and if he doesn't, we'll bring him back in towards the end. But please do keep the questions coming here in the chat. Thanks, Greg.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. They're great questions, and I'm in no rush, so we're walking through and certainly wanting to answer questions as they come, so thank you. Additionally, one of the things we're starting to realize is the social nature of citizen science is really starting to take hold at CSA.org, and so we're starting to embed a lot of customized notifications and alerts for folks to stay in touch with each other. So we, of course, have a newsletter we send out on a monthly basis, generally, maybe not every month. This month was particularly busy, so not so much happening in August for us, but we hope to send one out soon to membership. But also, whether you want to interact and link in an automated way, sharing your observations with the SciStarter dashboard. There was a great webinar brought to you by the Citizen Science Association last December, I believe. And Catherine Hoffman presented it. Really enjoyed watching it myself, and would certainly recommend you look at the YouTube video for watching that. But they talk a lot about their embeddable widgets and their abilities to track citizen science participation across projects. And so we've adopted their API to facilitate that. We're a SciStarter affiliate for that reason, and that we're really excited to see that partnership grow in the future. Selected by the user, right? These are preferences. They're my preferences, and so you can say, "Hey, send me the newsletter. Don't send me the newsletter. Share my observations with SciStarter or don't. It's up to you. Send me email notifications when someone posts a new forum post in a forum for my project or projects that I'm a member of." So that's kind of nice. It gives you a quick little ping on your smartphone with your email app to say, hey, someone just posted a question in the Front Range Piker project. That question might be really quite important. The bridge was out at mile 5 along the North Fork of the Poudre River Trail, so heads up if you're trying to get to that Piker monitoring site. So great ways to stay in touch. Observations, you can say send me notifications when new observations are made. This was actually really valuable for our project leaders. So for those of you running your own citizen science shows, you know, the heads up on that. It's like really great to be notified when new observations come in rather than having to check the website all the time. So that will ping you at a regular basis. It can become quite annoying if you have a ton of volunteers, but it also keeps you privy to the data that might be coming in. We certainly envision a lot more preferences coming down the road with the simple toggles that give you a lot of control over what you see and what you get as far as notifications are concerned. You have your own little dashboards for how many contributions you've made, how many projects you're a member of, how many photos you've submitted, how many monitoring locations you've happened to been monitoring, etc. So lots of real-time dashboards for the volunteers from the participant perspectives. So, and of course, all this can be done on our mobile apps. We are working very, very hard to improve them. I will be honest with all of you, they're buggy. And so we're working very, very, very hard over the next 4 months or so to release a new release of these apps, which is a pretty big renovation. I'll talk about that moving forward. For the sake of those who know and are aware of other platforms that do some similar stuff, there's certainly been the advent of some platforms that are trying to do similar things moving forward. There's a quick little comparison I put together. This is in no way to say one's better than the other or whatnot. The thing is platforms do different things for different people. And like we don't have really good educational offerings where teachers can automatically create 12 students and have them be anonymous, for example. Great features, we don't have that yet. That's not even listed on this list. iNaturalist really excels at bioblitzes and it's very taxonomically oriented. Super great platform. We're actually working on an integration with iNaturalist whereby if you happen to be measuring a species and you want to leverage the crowd at iNaturalist, there's ways to make that happen. And so our hope is to leverage the iNaturalist API, share out a citsci.org observation, and then upon attaining research grade, which if for those of you who use iNaturalist know what that is, maybe 10 people have corroborated and said, yes, indeed, that was a swift fox, not a red fox, then we'd like the iNat system to then send us back an API message saying, hey, put a badge on that observation that says that that's research grade. So anyway, Survey 123, really great system. Please do check it out. ESRI GIS software. It's not so much finely tuned to the nature of volunteers, but it really does very great capabilities for the GIS folks in the crowd. So moving on though, related to the topic at hand. So that's kind of like a CSI 1.0 kind of deep dive look at what CSI does for folks, and certainly happy to talk more about it. But what we're starting to see is we've seen now 650 of these things. And with that gives us a little meta perspective. And so we're trying to now start thinking about, frankly, we're disappointed in ourselves. We can do better. And so the citsci.org team is starting to really think hard about the holy grail of these projects is impacts, right? And so we want to start empowering our projects even to a better degree to maybe prompt them or bring awareness to various best practices and various techniques and maybe learnings from each other across projects so that we can elevate the entire game from with respect to kind of everybody's work, right? And so what does that mean to us? It really means having scientific impact that can be attained through increased publications in the peer-reviewed literature, white papers for agencies. I was down yesterday at the Left-Hand Watershed Oversight Group in Longmont, Colorado, looking at how they can use leverage volunteers to help them do restoration success monitoring, and that would then inform their decision making with respect to the next restoration techniques they do. They've got quite a handful of work to be done on Left Hand Creek after some floods here locally, and so that they're trying to say, before we go spend zillions of dollars doing stream bank restoration, let's study scientifically which stream bank restoration techniques work the best, and let's engage volunteers to do that study, and then we can then be smarter in our decision making about cost effectiveness of the next chosen stream restoration techniques would be informed by that study and hopefully more successful across the watershed. So, so white papers, you know, NGO kind of best practices doesn't have to see the light of day as far as the true peer-reviewed publication, but it can in fact have a lot of scientific impact. It can also have impacts, well done work on participants, increasing knowledge, skills, attitudes, behaviors, social capital, self-efficacy, and the like. A lot of social science work being done to study and document and provide evidence for those impacts. Looking at conservation impacts, actually restored wetlands, building trails, removing invasive species, improved habitat, mitigating wildfire risk, something near and dear to the Intermountain West's heart, given wildfire challenges, restoring streams and the like. And then policy decision making, right? Informing policies, they can be at any level of government, whether it be a city government, natural areas program, parks and wildlife, state parks, and then all the way up to DOI agencies from Park Service and Fish and Wildlife Service. Informing lawsuits, determining species status, guiding land management decisions such as that LWOG example, the Left Hand Watershed Oversight Group, informing policies and national policies and the like. But without evidence and evaluation of these success metrics, we can't really say we're having them. And so we're also starting to think very critically about ways we can bring data, because we're data people, into our evidence, right? And maybe those ways that folks can actually keep tabs of these impacts and therefore generate in an automated way infographics, which could see the light of day in reports, annual reports. And so our long-term vision is starting to see the enacting of citizen science involving automated report generation and seamless automated statistics of those infographics that come from the real-time data of citsci.org. And so now you could have at a click of a button a chart within a report that just is turnkey for next year's annual report with updated numbers. And so we're hoping that again, with our mindset of easing the challenges and hassles that our practitioners face, we're hoping to maybe make those become reality for folks moving forward. So some examples of actual projects working on things of concern that we've seen happen, and certainly supporting to the best of our abilities. There's a project called Climbers for Bat Conservation that are engaging Colorado rock climbers to help track down where bats might be, given the concern over white nose syndrome spreading across the country, as one example. A second example is invasive species modeling, where we have our roots way back in 2007, which was somewhat motivating for citsci.org in the beginning. The Wisconsin Invasive Plants of the Future, for example, engaged members to do quite some widespread monitoring of like purple loosestrife and diffuse knapweed and other such things across the state of Wisconsin, which led colleagues of ours and others to be able to, like Mark Renz at UW-Madison, to do some publications in ecological applications on these habitat suitability models for target invasive plants, without which the data from citizen science, these publications and predictions would never be possible. Another example is our near and dear to our heart here locally, our Front Range Piker project, predicting and evaluating and assessing American piker distributions and population trends, given changing climates. Eric Beaver, Chris Ray, Megan Mueller, Amy Mashing, and others from a great partnership formed through the Denver Zoological Foundation, the researchers at CU Boulder, a nonprofit called Rocky Mountain Wild, and others have really spearheaded this effort about 6 years ago, really got started looking at this little critter, super adorable. I'm part of this project as a volunteer. I absolutely love going and doing monitoring. These guys they don't thermoregulate, and so they can't pant like a dog, unfortunately, and therefore the Endangered Species Act folks, Fish and Wildlife Service said we didn't know enough about the populations because there had been local extirpations in the Great Basin in Nevada, and concerns were raised about whether there would be similar local extirpations or perhaps even extinction, unfortunately, depending upon future climate projections and other ranges throughout the Intermountain West. And
Greg,
so, yeah.
I'm going to chime in here. I thought maybe I'd catch you on that pica picture as a great sort of holding spot, not because it's the most substantive picture, but because it's cute. I just wanted to give you a heads up that we have a bunch of questions here and we're running up on the end of the hour. Sure. So if there's a last thing you want to say, I can feed you some of these questions to close.
Yeah, sure. I will, take any and all. You bet.
Okay, great. We can stay on the
We'll
Piker.
stay on the Piker. You
Leave
bet.
us with another slide. Feel free. I don't want to leave you without a chance to have a last word, but I'll just quickly say, in terms of Greg, I know that he is one of the most responsive and collaborative people that I know. So even if we don't get to all of these questions right now, we can continue this conversation via an email connection. So a couple, three here related to syncing data sets. Whether your platform syncs with sensors to upload data, whether it syncs with other data sets, so existing data can take advantage of your calculation tools, and whether your data set has the ability to have calculated fields automatically embedded in that.
Fantastic questions. So all of which are in our vision, and those were really, you've just laid the outline for my next 10 slides, which is not a big deal to not get to, but I can talk about it rather than share slides. But those are very much our future visions of integrating data sets. So one of the things this Piker story told us is that people are interested, like scientists at USGS, Eric Beaver, to download data across projects, and so we're working on ways to do that. Additionally, we're working with like CocoRa's to bring in climate data. A lot of these projects love to make comparisons with the data they've already collected, but also with data that might be collected by other volunteers through other networks such as CocoRa. So we are always talking about, and there's not enough time in the day is the answer here, but we're really passionate about making all three of those things happen. From a sensor perspective, we already have a lot of partners lined up to make that happen, from IoT devices to wireless sensor networks. Reason being, right now, the Piker project itself are bringing in data logger data, and they deploy data loggers, but they're not wireless, they're super remote. So then they collect them at the end of the field season and bring it in post hoc. We'd like to see that move into a real-time situation as soon as these things are able to attain satellite connectivity and create their own IP address and send data through sensors. So yes, a new data model that we're working with supports sensors. We literally are working on a 2.0 system. It's a whole separate website on a development server right now, but we are envisioning data models to support that.
That's awesome. Thank you. A quick question about whether you screen photos that are submitted related to rights. And thanks, Julian, for that question.
Yeah, great question. We had this very issue come up. So we're actually expanding our governance flexibility with respect to copyright. So the upshot is currently no, we don't. And so we rely on the good faith of our participants to be uploading in accordance to the thing they signed up with, and that's a Creative Commons 3.0 BY license. And at the end of the day, we're on good faith here that when you have to sign an agreement that says yes, data that I contribute are licensed under that agreement, which means it's a share alike kind of thing, which means you have to send attribution to the photographer if you were to reuse it elsewhere. But we had the Mountain Goat project, the Goat Coat trackers up in Glacier National Park, and they because everyone taking photos of mountain goats are really awesome photographers, they did not want their photos to be under that CC license. So now we're hoping to allow folks to offer a variety of licenses of their choice for their project, for their data that they get. And so we could actually retain copyright for that photographer. So no screening. With respect to, and outstanding to that and related to ethics, if inappropriate photos were to be submitted, we do retain the right to screen and remove those.
Thanks, Greg, for those answers. Here's a last one that I hope is visionary, gives you a chance to close off here with whatever you choose. Monica was asking, what's your vision for funding this long term? And I'll let you take that where you will. And I'll say in advance for folks who are leaving us, thanks for joining. I know we're at the top of the hour.
Yeah, thanks everyone, and hopefully we don't go too long. And Monica, great question. So to close, that is like the holy grail question. We're actually hoping to have a symposium on that very topic March 2019 in Raleigh, with bringing in experts that are business model creation folks. So there's this whole business model canvas. Check it out. It's called a BMC. We're creating our own business model canvases that see an ecosystem of funding support. We've been fortunate to have National Science Foundation support 3 times, and we are happy to say that we just had word from NSF that we have some more NSF funding coming because of a partnership with the Zooniverse. We're hoping to automate just sharing of CSA.org photos to the Zooniverse platform for crowdsourcing interpretations of the photos being submitted. This came about through our Mountain Goat project, but can't talk too long on that. But the upshot is we do see an ecosystem of funding sources. We are really actively looking at what they call a freemium model, where what you see is currently all free, and we would append to that a premium package where there might be a $29.99 or an enterprise package, maybe $99.99 monthly subscription if you so chose to get some additional capabilities like what we're talking about here with other additional data streams from other sources that might be real time, maybe some of these embedded reports and the like. These advanced capabilities are likely to fall under a freemium model where those subscription opt-in to augment some of our funding for long-term support. And then finally, we do a lot of consulting as another piece of that pie, and then philanthropic donations. So we'd like to change our pie from all research grants to a suite of a variety of funding sources. So big change.
Greg, thank you so much for those answers. Congratulations on the new funding. And for all, I think about just so much that through this funding, this platform is offering for free as a resource to your project. And Greg, as a collaborator, has just contributed so much to the field. We really appreciate you joining us for this webinar today. And thanks everyone for being on for this. I'll send a link to the recording in case folks have to chime off or did chime off before the end. Really glad to have you with us. And Greg, thanks again.
Hey, thank you, Jennifer. And thanks everyone for wonderful questions.
Take care. Bye.